That was in my, that analogy was in my head before you said it.
All right,
Not surprised at all.
a warm welcome to those of you who are joining us on the live stream. If you are listening to the podcast, we're starting in just under 3 minutes, so you may just hear background music. So you can skip forward with on your podcast player, however you are listening to this seventh dialogue on learning and leadership. See you in 2 minutes and 25 seconds. Let's begin. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning from Geneva, Switzerland. I'm Reda Sadki, co-convener with Karen E. Watkins of the Geneva Learning Foundation's Dialogue for Learning and Leadership. And tonight we have around our table for the very first time as key contributors, Nabanita Day, Dorothy Marsick, and Victoria Marsick. We also welcome back Bill Gardner and Nancy Dixon. Thank you so much for being here. Every episode is different, drawing on the life experience of key contributors and of listeners who become contributors by sharing their own learning and leadership challenges and what you are doing about them. You can learn more about the dialogue on the Geneva Learning Foundation's website, learning.foundation. You can now subscribe to the dialogue as a podcast. Go to learning.foundation/podcast for that. We also invite key contributors to shamelessly promote their work during the dialogue. This is so listeners who want to know more will know where they can go. I suggest that we dive right in with Karen. It's been a pleasure to meet on the last Sunday of each month with you. This is the 7th time we are together. You are leading tonight's dialogue for learning and leadership. And with Victoria Marsick, you've invited some additions to our cast of characters. And with each one, we're going to inquire about their singular leadership journeys. What they have led is only our starting point. We are interested in how individuals grow into leaders, how leadership emerges, grows, and flows, how leaders are challenged to lead, to learn, change, and transform themselves and the world around them. Welcome, Karen. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. It's really been good to do these dialogues with you, Reda, and I always feel like we learn as much as anyone who joins us. But I'm especially excited this evening this afternoon, really, to have my colleague and co-author of Dr. Victoria Marsick join the conversation. You know, she and I have been in dialogue about learning and leadership for 30 years. So it's really a joy to have her here with me and with you as we join with everyone else to talk about learning and leadership. And I think you'd find a lot of parallels in Victoria's learning and leadership journey. So I thought that would be a really nice place to start. And we also have with us, as you pointed out, a number of other folks joining us in the on the Zoom are also a couple of my colleagues from the University of Georgia, Diane Jones and Wendy Rona. Welcome to the Global Dialogue. We look forward to having you with us this afternoon.
Wonderful. So with each person that we're going to inquire about their singular leadership journeys, and what they've led is just our starting point. We're actually interested in how individuals grow into leaders and how leadership emerges, grows and flows. And several of the dialogue's key contributors have spent a lifetime investigating the significance of learning and leadership through their research and practice. So we will turn to Bill Gardner, Nancy Dixon, and others to help us analyze and interpret the significance of the individual learning and leadership journeys we're going to discover together. So your expertise and wisdom form beacons of light for this dialogue, even when we explore geographies and experiences several concentric circles outside the realm of your own experience. So Karen, let's start with Victoria. She, I believe, has been exploring learning and leadership for learning. She has not been writing alone. You have a very special kind of relationship with her, and between the two of you, I'd love to hear more about it, and perhaps that could be an entry point. Over to you.
Victoria, why don't you start?
Well, I mean, we should probably start with where we are and then kind of say, how did we get here, right? I think Karen and I finish one another's sentences and think in parallel lines, etc. And so, I mean, I think the leadership that we provide, certainly the leadership I feel I provide is part of it is, I don't think of it as leadership, I guess. I think that was an interesting question. When did you begin to think of yourself as a leader? I think it's something that I do that other people may perceive as leadership, but I don't think I set out to be a leader, per se. So I don't know. What do you think, Karen? Are you a leader who set out to be a leader? I think you are, because you studied in a leadership program. I never studied in a leadership program.
I think that like you, I did in fact kind of roll into leadership, not necessarily planning to be, but I was a freshman teacher in a community college, and I was asked to coordinate a group, and then I was asked to go into faculty development, and so I have moved very much from being an English major to somebody who was coordinating programs and leading programs, and then I was coordinating an interinstitutional project, that kind of thing. So it wasn't too surprising that I did go, in fact, and get a doctorate in leadership. So so yes, I have been trained in leadership, and I have had a number of leadership roles over my history. So I'm very conscious of how I think about myself in a leadership role.
I think by contrast, I didn't immediately pick up leadership. I think part of it, and I've been to some of the dialogues, and I love the fact that people talk about where it started. And for me, like many, I think it starts in the family. I think I grew up in a family that was uniquely supportive of us being there are only three of us in the family, not as large a family as Karen's, but there was a lot of support for being everything that you could be and being out there in the world. And my grandmother in particular was an amazing role model. My mother and father were too. And I don't think, however, in the world outside of me, I grew up in an era where women were not exactly expected to step into leadership roles. So there was no expectation that a woman would become a leader. Although in high school, there was a program for people to develop their leadership, and I was picked out for that. And I guess if there was any awareness, you asked about when you might be conscious of becoming a leader, I thought, well, why am I in this group? I don't remember what the group did, but clearly I thought, well, someone sees something in me that says I should be doing this. So I think then I didn't really have so many fears of stepping out and doing things that were maybe a little bit beyond the norm for women or for girls at that time, etc. And I just did them because I wanted to do them. So I'm a great fan of intrinsic motivation. And, I think that I wanted to go places and I wanted to go with people. I don't like, as Karen knows, I don't like to make my journeys alone. I like to make my journeys with other people. And I enjoy building community wherever I go. Karen said she visited with me. I've done a lot of work or gone to Italy pre-pandemic frequently. And one place in particular, which I absolutely love, is Bergamo. I taught for a couple of years in the summer at the University of Bergamo, and in the hill town of Bergamo is a small community. And Peter, my husband, and I, we became members of that community. We came back once a year, but we knew people. We kind of built our own community or entered a community that was built, but joined it. And I think that maybe. Some people would call this steward leadership, right? In a sense, but I think it is a kind of leadership that is more comfortable in collaborating with others. So you noticed I started out by saying, "Hey, Karen, let's talk about where we're at," right? But I don't really feel so comfortable stepping out and pronouncing, things. I feel much more comfortable. And I think I'm more, I've developed a lot of skills. In the beginning, I didn't have many doing that kind of thing, but I think I've become more interested in all ways in how do you work with people? How do you build a community where people are willing, able, and interested in joining hands and in bringing out the best in one another? And I think that's a tough job, especially in the days that we're in right now. But so I don't know. My leadership journey had a lot to do with who I am and what my family was, and the many mentors I've had along the way. My husband was asking me this question. We were talking before I got on, and reminded me I had, and Karen, you noted it. I did do some work with UNICEF for a number of years, and I had a wonderful role model in UNICEF. He was a Dane. A guy who had been very early on engaged in organizational development work, etc., and a leader that led by relationship building and by mentoring and by conversations with people. And so I think really when I think about the style of leadership or what I've acquired around leadership, it is more this notion of let's talk together about it. Let's inquire into it. Let's think about it together rather than here's my idea, we have to follow it that way.
I understand that very well. And I suspect that, don't you think that in this digital era that collaborative approach is more effective anyway right now?
I think it's done a lot. I don't know if it's more effective because I'm not out there doing it digitally enough, right? I'm teaching online, but I'm not working in an organization where digital work is predominant. But from my colleagues and students, et cetera, and friends who are doing that, and I'm sure Bill Gardner could talk to that, it is very much a collaborative venture. And I love the way mechanisms and practices are showing up, like agile leadership, for example, that agile, learning, agile technology, where it's not only that you have to know how to do this yourself, but there's scaffolding, there's supports, there's practices, there's ways of doing things that bring people in along the way. And not everybody knows they're welcome in any collaboration, and not everybody always values their willingness to step up and share something, especially if it's out of the box. And so I think in the day that we're in this digital day, we need to be able to figure out how to do that, because everybody's got something to say that's pretty important in many projects, and we don't necessarily have good conditions for doing that.
So Reda raises a question in the chat for you about being a white woman in post-World War II U.S. and how did that matter in the roles that you were in, and do you think it would have been different had you grown up in one of the countries supported by UNICEF?
I'm sure. I mean, I've had the great opportunity to do some living and working in a number of countries in Asia, particularly Southeast India, of course, which is South Asia, but also in Southeast Asia and in Bangladesh. And I think, I know that there's a big difference. I grew up in a family that was kind of, I don't know if it's working class or middle class or lower middle class or whatever it was. We weren't rich, but so I don't think anybody in the family ever felt that their privilege allowed them to just do whatever they wanted to do. But we do have a lot of privilege, and we had a lot of privilege growing up, even with the challenges of being in the United States, as opposed to being a place where maybe in another family, even in the United States, I'm sure I wouldn't have had that kind of opportunity. So there is something about feeling that even though you don't pick up your authority and offer things, you're entitled to do that. Even as a woman who is still not quite entitled, it became quite a surprise to some of the men around when I did that. But nonetheless, it still was something that was okay to do, even if it was out of the norm. And there are many situations where you start out with it not being okay, and you have to fight for that right to be able to do that. So that was a great question, Reda.
Yes, I think it is an interesting question that would encourages me to invite Dorothy Marsick to comment. And Dorothy, for those of you who don't know her work, has had a couple of musicals on Broadway dealing with women's issues and women's leadership and women's journey. And Respect was one of her musicals, and most currently Sisters is on. And so Dorothy, I'd love for you to comment on the question that Reda raised with, about women's leadership journey. And of course, I'd love to have you share your own journey.
Well, I'll answer Reda's first and then go into mine. But I think it's a really good question. Can you hear me? Because that's a buzz in the background here. Okay.
Yes.
I grew up in what is undeniably working class, a lower class family. My mother was a battered woman and an alcoholic. My father was a compulsive gambler, and just very, my brother was arrested all the time, in and out of jail. So, but I've actually thought about this a lot. What if my skin wasn't white and I would have grown up in that kind of environment? And I luckily went to a good school. I grew up in Wisconsin, which now doesn't have such great public schools, but it did back then. And before everything was gutted. And I knew from a very early age that I wanted a different life from what I grew up. And I knew my ticket out was being smart, because I was always the smartest kid in my class. And I was able to do that. I ended up with a doctorate. I became a professor. I was academic for 25 years before I got into playwright is in theater. But I've thought about if my skin was not white, that would have been really hard for me to move out of that environment. And if I'd been born in another country, in the kind of family I came out of, and my skin was not white, I who knows? So I know that despite all the obstacles in my childhood, I still am enormously privileged. I still was enormously privileged, and even now more so, because I've gotten into a different social class and income class than when I grew up. And it's a terrible injustice. It's one of the worst injustices we have in the world, is that just by where you're born, it determines what kind of life you're going to have. And then certainly adding on top of that, what color your skin is. That has nothing to do with your own abilities and your own hard work. So it's something for me that I've always been interested in, social justice. And a lot of my work is around that. When I was a management professor, I was working a lot on ethics and spiritual values in organizations, and really reducing the level of inequality. I mean, I came out with a book, Victoria, Sculpting the Learning Organization. Karen, what year did that come out? Okay, you're muted.
1993.
1993, yeah.
Okay, so mine was 97, Managing with the Wisdom of Love. And they were really on similar areas. We took different approaches to it. But I remember writing in there about how unjust the disparity was of CEO salary compared to average employee salary, which now is like 100 times worse than it was back then. And so those things have been really interesting. And I was always interested in women. I did a lot of workshops and writing about women in leadership and women in management. And then I lived in Prague. I was a Fulbright scholar and lived in Prague for 4 years. I was a Fulbright scholar at the University of Economics in Prague. And I came back to the States and was teaching at Vanderbilt, and it was a very difficult transition going. Anybody who's lived abroad and then you go back to your own country, it's always a shock. The longer you're away, the worse the shock is, because you've changed, but everybody you know doesn't see the change because it's all inside of you. And everything is like, the first time I came back to the States for the summer after being in Prague, I went to a grocery store and I had to go to bed for a whole afternoon, because I was living in a country where the grocery stores were very small, and you had one choice if you were lucky about anything. And you go into a grocery store in the United States, and the whole produce section is bigger than 5 grocery stores over there. It gives you a headache. It's like, why do we need this much choice? It's a tyranny of choice. We think this is great. So there were all kinds of things like that one goes through when you come back to your home country. But then I was in the South. I'd never lived in the South before, and Nashville was Music City. And so I said, I've got to do something to love this city. So I started doing research on women, looking at how women were depicted in popular music. As an extension of research I'd done before on women in organizations. And nobody had done this research before. It might be the only time in my entire life that I have been the first on something. And it turns out that the women went from codependent to independent, from someone to watch over me to I Will Survive. And this is what became ultimately Respect, the musical, which is played in 95 cities now. But I was doing it as a presentation. It morphed into a one-woman show. And then people said, you have to turn this into a musical. What did I know about musicals? I was like, you're in a car and aiming something. You don't even know where you're going. But I kept at it. And the audiences, when I did this, were electrified. And I was touching people's hearts in a way even though my workshops, I'd always connected with the audiences, this was a way that was extra special. And I realized the arts has a potency, because in workshops, you go through the head and you hope it gets down to their heart. But in the arts, you can go directly to the heart and the soul, and you can have great transformation through that. I would have people, I remember one guy came to one of my, when I was doing it as a one-woman show, I did the singing, I took voice lessons, and he came up to me afterwards, he said, all my life I've been angry at my mother because she was angry, and that's how she raised me. And I've just had such resentment towards her, but after watching this presentation you had, and I see what women have gone through, he said, I can forgive her. And he sent me an email a couple days later. He said, I can't tell you what this has done for me. I walked out of the building and the sky was bluer. And the colors were more vivid. He said, I love my mother now in a way that I could never love her before. And I thought, wow, a 1 hour presentation with me singing some songs did for somebody. Sign me up to stay on with this. So I kept developing it, and I eventually put it in front of some commercial producers who picked it up, and then it opened commercially in Florida, and it's pretty much been playing ever since 2004, as I said, in 95 cities. Then I did another one called Sisters, which is sort of the African-American version of Respect, and that played off Broadway 9 years until COVID, and we're reopening it in February. But I had to go through a real shift, switching careers, because I decided to leave academia full-time, which was a risk, but on one hand, but consider that I gave up tenure 3 times already, so I was used to making changes. And but I was going into a totally new field that I knew nothing about, and I had to go in with a beginner's mind. You work for 25 years in a field, and you get some stature, people respect you, and then you go in, nobody knows you, you're nobody and you're nothing. And it was a big learning experience, but I had to let go of ego, and I had to really learn and overcome new kinds of obstacles that when you're 25 and you're doing it, they feel different than when you're 55. So, but here I am now. I'm a full-time writer, and I'm part-time teaching at Teachers College. And I've had to be a leader in ways that I never expected, because when I started doing these shows, I was producing them initially, and I had to take on a lot of the leadership. And the other thing that I learned when I left academia and was out on my own was what it was like to be what we now call the gig economy, and on your own. I didn't have a mailroom. I didn't have a secretary. I didn't have, the university communication center that can do PR statements for you. And I had to do all my own invoices and everything. It was a lot of learning, but I'm really grateful to be here now where I am.
That's really neat, Dorothy. I really love that last bit about the being a leader without the support system. That to really, you are the chief cook and bottle washer. You have to take on all the roles and somehow make it work. I think that is Victoria and I talked about the differences between being prepared to be a leader and being thrust into being a leader. And you're now talking about another kind of journey, which is really the solo leader, with very little support to make it happen. That takes a lot of courage, And I'd love to hear Nabatni kind of comment on that, because I suspect she has a similar role. But I think Reda's going to transition for a second.
Thanks, Karen, and thank you, Victoria and Dorothy. We have from Facebook, I believe, we have Sohini Sanyal, who's been, I believe, she's been in attendance to every one of the dialogues, and that's especially significant because she is in India. So this is late night for her. Thank you, Sohini, for joining us. And her comment, which you should be able to see for those of you who are in the studio on screen, the labeling of women as weak has become so intrinsic in so many societies that often it's even difficult to speak of our challenges, even to the most sympathetic ear. Now, in the room, we're privileged to have a number of key contributors who have dedicated their life's work to the study of leadership and learning. And we're interested, we're going to turn to them to ask, what do you hear as you listen to Victoria's and Dorothy's narratives? What are the insights that you can share from your research that are relevant to the stories we're listening to? How do you listen to people sharing their experience of leadership? What do you listen to? Before we go to Bill Gardner, Nancy Dixon, we also have contributors who are not experts, who have not dedicated their life to the study of leadership and learning, but who have their own personal experience, and we have heard them in previous dialogues. So I'd like to go to Terry Lawson. After having heard Victoria Marsick and Dorothy Marsick, Terry Lawson is a doctor and teacher of medicine in Nigeria. Tara, I hope you are able to speak to us, and would love to hear what did you hear as you listened to the narratives of these two women that we kicked off with tonight. And I'd also like to go to Anu Rotimi. Anu, you have not been. I don't think you have been a contributor, shared your journey, but I know a little bit about the very interesting path that you have. As you listen to these two narratives, what are your thoughts? Are you able to speak to us? Would love to hear from you.
All right, thank you. Greetings, everyone. So happy to be here. My name is Anu Rutimi, and I'm joining in from Abuja, Nigeria. And currently, I am actually running my own organization, Center for Accountability and Inclusive Development, as a voice for the people in actually ensuring that the system and policy work for the people. They are people focused, they are people driven, and they are people owned. And this is coming out from a journey that I envisioned while I was very, very young. And, and that is why I relate myself with all the conversation that has taken place this evening, because I see myself as a child growing up from a family of a single career mother, that is coming from in Nigeria and in the society where it's believed that a woman that is not married should not be given a leadership role. And I grew up in a house where my mother was able to attain to the highest civil service position in a community that was religiously divided. She's from a Muslim background. Later, she became a Christian, and so the society in which she was working was not really friendly to her. So I grew up in that kind of environment, growing up to know that in leadership in life, you need to be able to defend what you want. So it was more, I saw leadership like being very assertive, ability to stand against all tiles and oceans that might come. Anytime you don't even know where they're coming from, they could come from even your own family. Because I grew up saying that, even in the family, she had to stand up to being a leader among her peers, among her siblings. So for me, it was that journey. Then also, as I grew up, also I found myself as a student union leader, and I remember I was somewhere one day and I needed to see someone, and I had to write on my mother's name. But when I got to see the personality, she said something that still strikes me today. She said, you have your own identity. You have your own name. Don't have a right on your mother's name or any other person's name. Create your own identity everywhere. It might be challenging. And since that day, I've always used that. So even though it could be very challenging. So I could relate with what Dorothy said last, that sometimes you also get to a point whereby you have no support system and you're just left alone to find the right, to fight against the tide that might be coming. And this was something that in my last job, paid job, I experienced, because at the point I just found myself as the head of the organization, and I was working in a system whereby you felt, one, you were too young to be the leader. You're a young girl. You're not married. so it was a cultural stroke, perceived leadership. And I had to actually sustain the organization. And it was also coming from a system that sees that, when you work with policymakers, you needed to make statements. So leadership for me has been a mix of all sorts of things, from the factor of a background to education, to even the kind of people we meet daily. So, and even the kind of school that we tend to attend, because there's what we call the social networking, the social networking in terms of who did you grow up, who are the people you know, who are your social capital, who are the people that create links for you. So sometimes leadership, a mix of all sorts, and especially in our own crime that is low and a low medium income country, whereby there's ongoing struggle for gender equality and equity. It's really a real struggle and come with economic power. So I hope that with these learnings that we will be able to fashion a stronger way where women will be able to find a support system that is able to help us grow. In fact, recently I actually had to change my job because I actually got into depression and I had no support system to be able to support me, because I was struggling with so many expectations. There was this the demand that you needed to make things work. And I was sleeping in depression and I was saying it and nobody felt I was just being crazy, So by the point I had to stand for myself, I had to take a bold decision. And that was when everybody now realized that all work I was doing and that they now started appreciating me, but it was just too late. So I think one crop for us from kind of this country, Nigeria, is that we need a stronger support system that can mentor us appropriately. It's not just political mentorship, because right now we have so many interventions targeting women to become political leaders, but we need more support for women in career, for women in public health, for women in community health. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Anu Rotimi, calling in from Nigeria. Now, I'd like to go, before we go back to Karen and our key contributors for their reflections on what they hear when they listen to these narratives. I'd like to go to Nabanita Day. So she's joining us for the first time in the dialogue, and we'll speak to her in a little bit about her journey. But I would first love to hear your reflections, Nabanita, about what you've heard so far. About the leadership journeys of Dorothy and Victoria and Anu. Do you recognize yourself in these in any way? What is or has been different to your mind as you listen, given your own journey?
Absolutely. I think the conversations until now has been amazing. I completely agree with the fact that, women in general, they have to overcome so many different challenges even before they can assume leadership roles. It could be, you could be somebody who is a stay-at-home mom, basically, who has to take care of their house and do all these additional responsibilities. And on top of that, you kind of trying to move your career forward, or you are trying to assume leadership roles. And there are not many people actually there to guide you. Like, for example, my journey, like I came to US on my own. I was the first person to represent coming to US from my entire community and family. And there was literally nobody giving me any guidance on, how to go about, being Asian immigrant to US and kind of bringing your mark and making that mark here. And I think there is a need for mentoring women, especially, and like defining what leadership means, especially when women feel shy to assume these roles, or oftentimes they go through imposter syndromes, right? Feeling that even though you are in a role, you feel like, am I a fraud? Why am I here? Like, why am I? What if tomorrow I get fired? Or am I good enough? I think these kind of narratives needs to be changed when we see more representation of women in these leadership roles, and see them doing amazing, and seeing that, oh yeah, there are people just like me who are here, who are killing it in their game, who are doing such amazing roles and jobs, and having that leadership Like even in organizations, the leaders, they have to come forth, and they have to basically talk about their journeys, talk about their struggles, normalize failures in the organization, that if somebody takes a risk and it doesn't go a certain way, even normalizing that it's okay to fail, as long as you're taking the initiatives, you're striving towards making a difference, making a change. I think that is the most important that we want, like at least my generation wants from the leadership that we see today. And I think another thing would be that you can think of leadership also from an innovation perspective, where if you are a leader, you are in that spot, you have that power and that platform to bring out different changes, instead of saying that, hey, we have always done things a certain way. Maybe changing, if you're identifying certain things in your organization that needs to be changed, like make that effort to bring new initiatives, make that effort to make voices heard from the lower level, from the bottom up, and not only just top down leadership. Like let people bring in changes, let people suggest things that can be different, and kind of giving them that platform to grow and to be heard. I think that is another very important area that I feel like leadership should go into.
Thank you, Nabanita. And we'll be discussing your own leadership journey, because what I heard was kind of summaries or conclusions probably drawn in part from your experience. And we're going to delve into that in a little bit. We have Amel Altahir, who's connecting from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, who says, glad to hear from Anu. As a woman, my fieldwork has taught me a lot to strengthen my leadership skills. Now we have Diane Jones, who shared in the chat the following reflection, and would love to hear from her. I hope she's going to be able to speak to us. Please do introduce yourself, as you have asking you to unmute, Diane, if yes. And you wrote, as I listen to each story, I'm thinking about common themes. There seems each had a calling, taking risk, and a broader definition of community. Tell us more. First of all, tell us who you are, how you have engaged with what you know about leadership. Where does it come from? How do you know what you know? And what are your reflections after listening to the several narratives?
So I wasn't planning on talking here. So this is, I thought I would just be in the background here. Well, I teach some leadership courses at Georgia, and I'm looking at all of my books, that fill all of this room on leadership. And so we know these concepts. And I was listening to Victoria when she was talking about, and I was writing down some of her words. The ability to influence others in a very granular level. We look at leaders that you need what? You need followers, right? I mean, it's kind of basic, but you need followers, building relationships and all of that. But I'm intrigued by the fact that when I listened to all of you, there was something else that was going on here. And I'd like you to, I'm curious about that. There was like an actual calling that made you, Victoria, you mentioned that word intrinsic. That there was, and I'm curious, do you think part of this has to do with being an academic? And I was thinking about Dorothy, is that you're digging deeper into the knowledge that compelled you or motivated you to go and do something? And then last is this whole concept about community, is that, some people think about community, again, in a very local level, that, it's kind of like their home. And you all seem to have a different definition of community that seems significantly broader. So I'm curious about that.
Those are wonderful questions. My suggestion is we go to Nancy Dixon, whose work is focused on increasing collaboration and knowledge, and who says our most effective knowledge sharing tool is conversation. And then Bill Gardner, whose really core specialty is around coaching, which involves a lot of listening. Would love to know, Nancy and Bill, we've appreciated your contributions in past episodes. Would love to hear your thoughts about these narratives. And then if we, then we can go back to Karen and maybe hear back from Victoria, Dorothy, Nabanita, and Anu. Nancy?
I think what's coming to mind for me is the this idea of leadership and the idea that we grow up and aspire to be a leader. Although many people have said they didn't aspire to it, but that it was sort of handed to them. But this whole idea that we need to become, a leader, become the best we can be, become something special. It feels to me, it comes out of an idea of individualism rather than an idea of community, that your goal is to achieve, to star, to that. And I just wonder about that, that sort of influence that all of us have been subjected to, that we are to be striving all the time to be, higher, better, a kind of thing. When I think what is happening in the world is that we're more aware that we are both formed by and that we influence the community in which we are, and that somehow that idea that you have influenced a community seems less important than being in the leader role. So I just think there's something going on in our world about the need to strive to be at the top that I think is sometimes harmful to us rather than helpful. I don't think I've said what I meant very well, but Bill's always good at putting anything into words. I'll return it to him.
Before we go to Bill, I suggest there's a really interesting and quite detailed comment from Sahini Sanyal, who says, sometimes leadership comes from being pushed into the deep end of the pool. Early in my career, she says, we used to have training reviews with clients. When I joined the team, my supervisor handled the first review meeting I attended. Next month, right during the review, she simply announced that I will lead the review. It was a terrifying moment, but handling that one meeting alone, answering all the tough questions of the clients, gave me so many new ideas to be implemented. Had I not been pushed into that moment of leadership, I probably would have taken much longer to bring ideas to the table. Maybe in this episode, or maybe another one, we'll talk about stretch assignments. Bill Gardner?
Thank you. So I'm a little bit odd and concerned being the first male key contributor to speak after these great examples of leadership. But to your question, Reda, about some kind of meta look at people's stories, I think it's important for me as a coach, just part of my process is early on in coaching to have people do two things. And one is to look back at how they got to be where they are, not just in leadership, but who they are as a person, what values have surfaced from their childhood and the area they grew up in and things like that. And I will say, of all the stories that I've heard, I think maybe I've heard every possible combination of childhoods, from being impoverished to growing up with wealth and privilege and high expectations and things like that. And what it nets out for me is that whatever that start was, whatever that story a person has put together about how they got where they are, the critical thing is not what happened to them, but what they learned from it. I have mentioned before, I'll get on a soapbox in a very short order about reflection. But I have coached people who started off basically being emotionally abused by one of their parents. And I've had people that grew up spoiled, just given anything that they wanted. And both of those past stories can turn into great leaders or not great leaders. It depends on how they took that experience, what they picked to focus on, and what it taught them about themselves. The other thing that I can't get away from is the particular leadership model that I use to get multi-rater feedback. In the second book that the people who created that put together, now that they have thousands and hundreds of thousands of people in their database, one of their findings was that women tend to score higher on all of the characteristics that they have found to be a part of effective leadership naturally. And I think, everybody here who has spoken about relationships, and even the word community is talking about not being the standout person like a lot of us males were raised, like it's my job to get out there and take control, but I'm going to do this through a relational way. And that's what all the leadership models are pointing to now. It's not the person who points the direction and takes everybody with them. It's the person that co-creates that direction from a whole lot of other smart people and then can help head in that direction. So that was my big meta thing. I love hearing stories. Obviously, that's why one of the reasons I start off coaching like that. And then the element that goes next, which is, okay, so here you are, here you've learned. Now let's reflect on what's happening right now and put it in the context of where do you want to go as a human being, as a person. We can talk about the leadership part of that as part of that model, but where do you need to go and how does your past inform that and the values that you've created up to this point? So I think that's mostly what I wanted to say there. Thanks for asking me.
Thank you for that, Bill. I really resonate with that. And I was sitting here thinking, Dorothy, that the power of story fits so well with the journey that you've taken. I'd love to hear your reflections on.
Did you say Dorothy? Okay, my reflections on what Bill just said? Okay.
Any.
Okay. I mean, one thing you said, Bill, really hit me because you talked about this current research about how women are naturally more. I was thinking back to Alice Sargent's book that came out in the 80s, Beyond Sex Roles. Does anybody remember that? It was so groundbreaking. And of course, we don't use that term sex roles anymore. But her point was that when we used to talk about masculine and feminine qualities, that's old vernacular. If you'd list down what women typically are, good listeners, take charge, they're, empathetic, they're this, and you'd list down what a leader should be, strong and so on. It was masculine, but actually the qualities that people listed for women were what was needed in leadership roles. And so, I mean, it's nice that 50 years later, we're finally, there's some quantitative research that's, and I was really struck too by the things you were talking about it's not what your background is, but what you do with it. And I think one thing I've learned in theater is that, when actors are on the stage, everybody makes mistakes. They lose their lines, they mix up, they're suddenly doing the next scene and everybody on stage is like, what? How am I gonna? And so it's not the mistake, it's the pickup from it. What do you do? So that's exactly what you're saying. It's what do we do with what we have, and how do we see the resources? And I've been thinking a lot lately about despair. And what I discovered a year or two ago is that in the Catholic Church, that despair is a mortal sin, which is like, that's pretty important, and despair. And there was a really good podcast I listened to this week on the Canadian Broadcasting System program called Ideas. Father Martin, I forget his first name, he talked about the difference between despair and sadness, and how you can be sad because there's a lot of people with COVID, or you can be sad, but despair says, oh, we're never going to have a vaccine, when nothing's ever going to get better. And if you had a rough life, or even you didn't have a life, we've all gone through some rough things in the last couple of years, but if you get frozen in despair, you're just immobilized. So it's maintaining hope, which helps us to find solutions that we might not have thought of before. So I think Bill, what you were saying really resonated for me in that regard.
Thank you. I think that's a really interesting reflection. Victoria, I think you were prepared to say.
I wanted to pick up also, Bill, on your story piece, which I think, we've heard with Dorothy also saying, and Nabanita, I think in your story, your examples too, that story is so powerful. And, it seems like in the past, in terms of the way you could be successful, et cetera, it was to stay away from story, right? I mean, I find it very interesting that initially I discovered story early on also, and maybe a lot of people discovered story and used story, but they were counseled not to use it in organizations, that adults don't like story because that's playthings and juvenile, et cetera. But story to me is what really, as Dorothy, as you were saying also, that it kind of captures the heart. It starts with the heart, and it also, you develop empathy for feeling with that person about their experience. It resonates with you, but it also enables you to really both get connection with them and also insight into yourself. So it seems to me that story work is really important. And the flip side to that, which I've also been exploring with a collaborative group of people who are exploring it, of course, is listening. Because I don't think we listen well enough right now. And I'm struggling a bit with the balance between listening and talking when it comes to people who are very strong in a point of view, because I think listening will only go so far, and then you may be actually, what is that word, that codependent, or supporting them in a kind of reinforcing something that you do need to challenge. But it does seem that if you think about if you push back at people immediately rather than hear them, they don't feel heard. And feeling heard well enough seems to me to be so central to the work that we all do as leaders in one or other way, and it certainly is important in community building. So it seems like that notion of working with story and listening well to one another, creating space for being empathic and for understanding the other person is really really important. I also wanted to say to you, Nancy, that I agree that there seems like an artificiality sometimes about people wanting to be a leader. It's like, oh, that position has a lot of status in society, so I want to be there, But it's more about the role and less about what can I contribute as a leader. Who am I? What am I doing? And how can I help bring further, a better place to live or work or be? But I love story. It's also one of my favorite things. And I love coaching, Bill. I actually have studied it now and taking up some skills in that area.
Can I make a comment about what Victoria just said? I've never thought about this before, Victoria, but the whole thing of story, if you look, I've worked so much in my academic career and as a management consultant with corporations and leaders and workshops and doing consulting. And until you mentioned it right now, it didn't occur to me that stories are a big part of CEOs and top leaders. They're allowed to get up in front of a group and tell their stories. And so there's a hierarchy. If you're on the top, it's good to tell a story, but everybody else should shut up.
Mm-hmm.
So I love, I'm really appreciating everything I'm hearing. I do wonder the following, and I want to be a little bit contrarian because there seems to be this seems very consensual. What I hear is a lot about self-reliance and self-esteem and dignity and challenging power, and those are very important parts of human existence. But we're talking about these things, and in most of his stories, I heard a lot about the self, and of course, it's about that interaction. And I think about this article by Jessica Dean and colleagues from 2014 on leadership theory and research. And they ask, if you see yourself as a leader, who are your followers? And that's so if it is about sort of becoming stronger as an individual, finding your way, learning to sort of respect yourself and earn the respect of others, is that really leadership? Because we're not talking about getting people sort of engaging with others to lead, or as a servant leader to so sort of walk along with others. So I'd love to hear from our contributors, starting with Victoria and Dorothy. I mean, leadership is a social process that involves this iterative exchange among two or more individuals, and leaders and followers are co-producers of leadership. Leadership is shared and distributed among multiple people. So who were your followers? How do you think about that relationship between you as a leader and those you are leading? Or are we talking about self-reliance, self-esteem, dignity, challenging power, important things, but are they actually about leadership?
Well, I think that when it's put in those terms, who are your followers, it's a up-down kind of thing. The language itself reinforces hierarchy. So I don't think of it in terms of leading and following. I think of it as leading and being with people, and being in relationship with people, and engaging collaboratively, or trying to, so I don't think about, I think that many of the challenges we have today are not things that allow us to impose a point of view. If we're fooling ourselves, if we think that our view is better than anybody else's, it may have some elements of it that is, but we're short-sighted. And so I think that's why I really feel very much that it's not that collaboration is necessarily the best thing all the time and in all situations. I mean, Chris Argyros always used to say, and collaboration was at the heart of his model, right? He said, if there's a fire right now, I want somebody to take charge and, get us out of it, right? So the question of what kind of collaboration, and, then you better have followers getting you out of the fire, right? But I feel in some ways it's, I don't think you are a leader unless you're recognized by others, but maybe some of the people who recognize you don't even know are out there. And, particularly, I mean, think about the people who go to Dorothy's musicals. Maybe a couple of them come up and talk to her, but Dorothy's musicals affect a lot of people, right? And Nancy, the work that you do and the conversation dialogues that you do, and, anybody, Nabanita, I'm sure that you're encountering this all the time in the work that you're doing. So I don't even know that we know who our followers are sometimes. It's different if you're in an organizational unit, of course. I have to be a leader of, they always say that leading academics is like leading cats. So I have my own cat leading activities going on all the time in the academic environment. But I think the leadership often stretches beyond, your immediate circles if you're out there in the world in one or other way. And so people who see you, the people I see on these dialogues, they're important influences in some of my thinking, so that's kind of, I get a little passionate about that. I think that we need new language. I understand what you're saying, but I think we need different language. I don't know, Dorothy, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I like that perspective. And I think the difference between formal leadership and informal, you're talking about in your program, you've got some formal leadership, and we've all been in some kind of formal leadership role. But even there, how do you do it? Are you the fascist leader? I'm using an example, but try to bend people to your will, or do you ask a lot of questions? I think the thing about listening, the thing I've been thinking about for years, I really got this from Chris Argyros, was the importance of asking questions. And I don't ask enough questions. I had spent 2 years of my life trying really hard to ask more questions, and I finally felt like I was making a dent on it, but we're just not trained to do that. But people, early in my career when I started doing management consulting, and I'd go and do these organizational audits, and I thought I was really imposing on people by asking them to sit with me for an hour and talk about their work, and I was asking questions. Everybody loved to be asked questions. That's what I learned. Nobody asks them questions. They want to be heard. They want their voices to be heard. So that's part of it, but also this thing about collaboration. I find, I'm a playwright and I'm also a producer, and I could just be very, use my power to do that. But when I'm working with actors, I'm often asking, so what do you think about that? And the actors will say to me, wow, I don't get a playwright or a producer that asks me a lot. It changes the whole tone of it. And and I work with a Broadway producer, Bill Franzblau, and I've worked with him for like 16 years on a number of productions. And we've sort of developed a collaborative model where if there is an issue that comes up and it's artistic or about the writing, if we don't agree, then it defaults to me. And if it's a business thing and we don't agree, it defaults to him. So we figured out a way to manage conflict, but to be collaborative. Neither one of us is a higher up on we don't have a hierarchy. We had a guy a few years ago who wanted to buy into one of my shows, and he said he wanted 51%. We said, no, there's no way. He said, well, I want to figure out, how do you two make decisions? Because I want to get a set rule here so that when I come in, I know what percentage my vote is. And we're like, we don't make decisions that way. And we finally decided not to work with him because it would have changed the dynamics of how we solve problems. And it really was a good lesson for me to understanding how you can create an environment where you figure out a way to collaborate with the people you're working with, you ask questions, but you defer. And if that person has more expertise and you can't figure out a solution, you say, I'm going to defer to you. And you defer to me on the other ones. So I think thinking about it and talking about it is really important.
Could I just come
Thank
in?
you, Dorothy. Actually, Nancy, Terry Lawson has said something in the comments, and I'd love to hear from Terry. Terry says that you need to resonate with the reality of your followers, and I thought that was a really neat kind of reflection on what you've heard. So I'd love to go to Terry and then Bill, and then I understand Nancy wants to speak as well. And then I think, so could we go to Terry?
Hello?
Yes, hello.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Sorry I joined a bit late. So just to add my little bit, in my experience, listening to other people's stories and how they manage their leadership challenges, I think that sometimes it could sound as though you're achieving some level of success is because of something special you have in you or something special you did, and that makes you look a bit larger than life to most people, and could make people feel, okay, because I'm not a doctor or I'm not that well educated, I may not be able to do this or achieve that, because they were only able to do it because they had this level of exposure and so on and so forth, or some sort of privilege. And I think the stories that have resonated with me have been those that have helped me in my path, are those that in which I see, if I can put it, like ordinary people with the same fears, people with some weaknesses, people who started off not believing in who they are or what they had, grow slowly, go through a process of transformation, and to get to a point where they make everyone listening to them realize that, look, if I can do it, you can also do it. If I can achieve it, you can also achieve it. It may not be the same way, We may not follow the same route. We may not use the same ideas, but overall, we have something in common, and that's that we want to make a change. We want to achieve a goal. And I think that's the ultimate thing. What is our focus? Is it something good? Is it something worthy? Is it something that is going to add value? And once we can all agree that that's the common thing that we have, then it doesn't matter what path we are led through, but there are some key factors that we need to get there: the diligence, the determination, the resilience, and so on and so forth. So I think those are terms that kind of always resonate with me, irrespective of the industry in which I find a leader or, or a mentor. So I have mentors in engineering, I have those in medicine, I have mentors that are selling, just traders in the market, and I'm really inspired by them because I see a common purpose, I see a common drive, a common character in them that lets me know that irrespective of where I am or where I find myself, I can become who I want to be, achieve great things. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. I love the addition of purpose, that the common purpose that aligns us is maybe different from following, right? The purpose is what brings us together. That's really nice. So I think I'd love to hear, Bill. I know you had your hand up and we kind of kept going. And then Joyce had some interesting comments in the chat, which I'd love to get to. So, and of course, so Bill.
Okay, if I can remember why I had my hand up. I think it was when Victoria was talking about story in particular. And a couple of things, of course, a story occurred to me, a quick story, that back in 1988, I went to the first formal presentation by a Chamber of Commerce group in Pennsylvania where I was living. They had brought in a nationally recognized speaker about women coming into leadership positions and in power positions. And so we're in a large room, she's up speaking, and she said, men and women approach things differently. It's just the truth. And so the men have always set the rules. And she said, for example, you go into a room full of men meeting, they interrupt each other constantly, and it doesn't upset them, or they're not personally affronted by it. They just raise their voice until the loudest person has the floor. And it's no big deal. They move on. Nobody's upset about it. And she said, my experience with some of the women that I've coached who have gotten to a level of pretty senior leadership is that they wait their turn to answer or to participate. And waiting your turn means you never get a turn. And so her suggestion was that women needed to learn to interrupt. And I remember that so vividly because at that moment, I thought this whole thing is not going to work, because the purpose, as I understood, of bringing more women into organizations and nurturing them to go into leadership positions was so that the two different types of approach or views would make the organization better and stronger. But here was an expert telling us women need to be more like men to be successful. It just blew my mind. And unfortunately, my table of 8, when they put us in a small group discussion, they all agreed with her, including the women at the table, that, oh yeah, that's what we have to do. Those are the rules. We have to follow the rules. So that was very troubling to me. And I think we've moved way past that, but I think there's still some of that residual thing about more often than now, it's referred to as not a cultural fit or not a leadership fit or whatever. But we've got to get to where everybody who has gotten to a place to have a voice at the table actually has a voice at the table. And the other thing that's occurred to me as we're talking, and since people have mentioned Ardris quite a few times, the term leadership is pretty far up the ladder of inference, because as I'm listening to people talk, we've talked about power, like positional power or personal power. We've talked about power. We've talked about management stuff. we've talked about influence. We even brought up servant leadership, which I've always thought was a little bit redundant. If you think about it, I mean that's what a leader is, right? A servant of the people that they're attempting to influence. And then lastly, because I kind of cringed when the definition came up, leader follower, because I think that's a false dichotomy, because it sounds positional, like I'm going to lead and all these other people follow. I can identify them and write their names down. But we're talking about influence, and influence is co-created. Unless somebody mentioned expertise, like if you're the expert in a field and I defer to you, I don't see that necessarily. I see that as a power difference, not a leadership potential. I've seen, there was some writing about, I think it was in Spain, after a war, in an attempt to bring more men back to the church. The Catholic Church started a group to go out and influence men to influence other men. And the first thing they did was follow what had been called the communist model, which was, it doesn't matter. A person can be a CEO in a building, but if the elevator operator in that building is a person who has a lot of influence, everybody likes them, they talk to them, the person knows all about them, asks them questions, listen to. If that's the person that's influencing, this Catholic group said, we need to go get that person to understand about church, and they'll influence others to come, even though everybody in the building outranks them. So I think it would probably benefit when we're talking about a high up the ladder of inference about leadership is, what the heck is leadership? How do we know it when we see it?
All right. That's a worrisome question in episode 7, but we'll come back to that. We have Joyce and then Nabanita. Both Joyce wrote a very interesting comment, and I would like to hear firsthand from Joyce Murithi. If you can introduce yourself, Joyce, here, and then we'll go to Nabanita Day for her reflections on the dialogue so far, and then we'll reboot and kickstart with actually Nabanita's leadership journey and go through the same process of understanding who she is, where she's been, where she's going, and how she got there and how she thinks about how she got there. Joyce, how are you doing this evening? I believe it may be afternoon for you. Tell us who you are, where you are, and why you're listening in.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Reda and everyone, for giving me this opportunity. I'm joining you from Maryland, USA, and it's about 4:13 p.m. I have been a leader. I don't know whether I'm calling myself a leader at this point. And the reason why I have joined this forum is because I want to hear how other people have been leaders and continue to be leaders in the community, because I think right now I've been forced to be informally a leader in one of my high school alumni group. It's not something I planned, like one of our speakers said, but I am there right now, and I don't have a choice because people have decided to make me the leader, and we have to succeed in the endeavor. One of the endeavors is to empower them and educate them more or less how they can be health makers or decision makers in their family, and also the issue of COVID-19. But I want to say that listening to all of you, I have a lot that I can say about my leadership journey, especially at work. But I feel the leadership relationship between leaders and followers, especially in formal environment, a leader cannot be one without followers. And in this case, a leader has to know what is the purpose or the vision and the mission of the enterprise or the organization that they are leading. In the same way, once the leader understands this, then you steer the followers towards meeting that goal, not imposing on them, but finding different ways to get your followers to accept and respect and follow you in the direction you want to be. At the same time, you get to a point whereby your followers, on the other hand, influence you as a leader. And the followers can influence a leader in different ways. Maybe the culture you create, you have to sit down in a meeting and you all decide this is what we want and this is the goal. How are we going to achieve it? And you set those benchmarks. And once you succeed, you come together to discuss your results. That way, you might just create that culture of success and to the leader and the followers in equilibrium and become the partners. Still respecting the leader and the leader respecting the followers.
Joyce, I'm sorry, but you're breaking up. Is there anything you can do to get a better connection? Is there anything you can do to get a better connection? Because I'm struggling to hear you, and it sounds extremely interesting, but I haven't been able to fully capture what you're sharing. Is there any way you can improve your connection? Otherwise, I would encourage you to.
Let me come in later. Let me try to join from.
All right, and Joseph and Gugi says, Joyce, that's wonderful. So I may be the only one who hasn't been able to hear properly. But please conclude.
Okay, so I wanted to say it can be in a social or emotional intelligence. You have to listen to each other until your relationship has been set up. And this is something I'm trying to do with this group of women, to empower them to be able to make decisions at home, and especially to be able to influence the male in their homes. Over to you, Reda, and I will get over this.
Thank you, Joyce, and I'm so sorry that these connection problems affect all of us, no matter where we are. It can happens to everyone, and it's normal and healthy. I would say it's just unfortunate this time we haven't been able to hear. All right, we are at the 1 hour and 18-minute mark, and when I think about it, I realize that we've barely scratched the surface of the stories, the life journeys of Dorothy Marsick and Victoria Marsick, whom we started with, and that is the nature of the medium, I would say. And I encourage you to go look online, Google their names, look them up. We've shared, for those of you who are following the dialogue on Telegram, we've shared the link to their LinkedIn profiles. There's a lot more to their stories than we're going to be able to hear tonight, including on the leadership dimensions. Now, I'd like to reboot and this time shift to Nabanita Day. She first wanted to share her reflections on the dialogue so far, and then we're going to ask her in a way some of the same questions about her own path. Nabanita, first of all, let's start with your reflections.
Absolutely. I think there are some of very good points that were shared, and one of them was the story part of it. And I do believe that leading with story, it helps you resonate with the audience that's listening, and especially drive conversations in ways that you can kind of cater to people's emotional needs and primary Maslow's needs. So if you can tie your story around primary Maslow's needs of food, shelter, and then or position, and kind of drive around why what you're doing is important. I think that kind of resonates with a lot of different people, and that's kind of the experience I had when I built returnships.org. I built it last year in December, and then I had kind of incorporated the story behind it is I was trying to help my family member basically return to the workforce, and I just put that story behind and I put it on a Facebook group, and the next day I wake up and they were 300 likes, and there were a bunch of comments of people who thought it was interesting. And I think the fact that I shared a story and I kind of tied it to a purpose that I'm trying to build, I think that really resonated with a lot of people. And I've seen that happen across multiple things. Most of the people who are doing startups today or are getting into any sort of movement, I think they are kind of leading with their story. So yeah, I think that is something I would definitely say that is great. Another thing I listened from the conversation was around, sometimes you are indirectly influencing people, and kind of do not know the audience that you're influencing. And that also very resonates with me with returnships.org as well, because in the past few months, like our initiative has had like interest and page hits, and from 90 countries. And of course, I do not know everybody from those countries, but having that level of impact that, people resonate with the work that you're doing and they want to return to work, or they know somebody, a caregiver who has taken that break and is trying to return to work. I think when you have that sort of influence, I think my suggestions would be like the kind of content you create or the kind of impact you make, having that much more generic, so that that way different people can relate to the work that you're doing, and also bringing in people from different backgrounds, and they're representing different backgrounds, and having them share their stories on your platform. I think that is another way where you can kind of drive leadership, in the way that you are letting these people, their voice be heard in platforms and places where all these decisions are made.
Thanks, Nabanita. Could we rewind a little bit? Because I know, of course, you want to talk about the organization of which you are the founder, and we're definitely going to talk about returnships.org. I think it's a fascinating concept. But I went to your personal website, and I was sort of bedazzled by the number of backgrounds, the areas in which you have some kind of experience and expertise. So first of all, there's not one, but three sort of taglines: software engineer, serial entrepreneur, Forbes contributor. And then your resume covers AI, machine learning, data, moonshot, finance and business, leadership, evangelism initiatives, entrepreneurship and hackathons, program, product management and consultancy, diversity and inclusion, education and healthcare, open source, social media analytics, AR, VR gaming, cloud and web app dev, security and identity. So can you tell us who you are? And when you put together this website presenting your self-presentation in the digital space, what were you thinking?
Absolutely. So let's rewind a little bit back. So I was born in India, and I lived all across India. That's where I did my schooling. And then for my undergrad, I actually got it from Dubai. So I lived there for 4 years. I went to BITS Pilani, Dubai campus, and I got my computer science degree from there. And then I came to US at UMass Amherst, where I got my master's in computer science degree. And then I moved to Seattle, Washington, where I was working for Microsoft for like 3 years as a software engineer. And then now I work for Uber as my day job as a security engineer. So I think I am like somebody who is from tech. I have a like very defined tech backgrounds. However, I believe that apart from your day job, you should have a lot of different hobbies and a lot of different things, and you should be influencing a lot of different areas. And that's where I feel like through my school, I took up so many different projects in different arenas, like machine learning, security, cloud computing. I was also a Microsoft student partner back in the day, which like a liaison between Microsoft and the students on campus, and kind of telling them about these technologies and training them. So yeah, I did like a bunch of different things, and then also did startups. So in my grad school, I built this Chrome extension called Project Fib, which can detect fake news on the internet. And we were one of the first people to build that in 2016. So it had a lot of traction. It was all over the web, on Business Insider, Washington Post, Mashable, BBC News, Huffington Post, like all over the place. If you search Fib and then my name, Nabanita, you should be able to see like a bunch of articles around that.
So yeah, I have a question for you. So obviously you've excelled at very many things that you do. You're obviously also very accomplished. Is that sufficient or necessary or both to make you a leader?
I think I will say that my backgrounds in different areas and just living in different places and countries, I think that has really contributed to see the issues in different areas. Like, for example, back in India, I know that for a fact that, women are often not given a lot of, they struggle when they receive education or even the support, like a lot. There's still a lot of mentality around how, women should be just married off, and, they do not need to pursue leadership roles, or their role only belongs in kitchen. There are still like mentalities around that. So I think having that kind of background and identifying those issues, I think that really helped me build my leadership journey, because then I can be like, these are the pain points that I need to address, and being in tech, I can basically build out websites or products or things that, that can kind of cater to these kind of problems and make an impact across the world. So I believe that having,
My next question for you is how is your leadership journey different from your career path? What is the difference when you think about those two things? Are they the same? How are they different?
I think my leadership journey, especially like building different startups, like be it Project Favor, being it building returnships.org now, it has been different from just my traditional career path, because I think my traditional career path has been like, getting your education, then going through tech and, getting these roles. However, leadership is something that I've gone after, build out these products, which I didn't need to. Like, there was no need for me to build out Project Fav while I was in school, or there was no need for me to build out returnships.org while I'm working at Uber currently as a security engineer. It's just something that I feel like I've identified these pain points, and I wanted to be that voice of change basically for the people who face these day-to-day problems. And I took that leadership or that initiative basically to build out and influence these products. So I think they are very different.
So Navanita, can you reflect and think about a time when you first saw yourself as a leader? Maybe you said, I'm the leader of something, where you felt and recognized and realized that you were exercising leadership. Can you think of that moment, maybe the first time, not necessarily, and tell us about that?
Absolutely. I think it would be hard to think about the first time, but I can give you an example. So while I was at Microsoft, basically, the fact that I love hackathons basically are coding competitions, basically, where you kind of go and build out, there are world's problems. So you can pick anything and you can build out a product. So I used to love going to hackathons and do entrepreneurship. But when I went to Microsoft, I was doing like my traditional 9-to-5 job as a software engineer and kind of missed having that area. So what I did was I built this Shark Tank group at Microsoft, where, I brought together like 100 software engineers, devs, data scientists to come together and brainstorm ideas for Microsoft or just for social good. And I think that was one of the points where I was like, oh, I'm a leader here in this space because, I'm congregating all these people who shared the same passions of technology and wanting to do this change and kind of inculcating entrepreneurship and, how to go about building a product or how to think, conceptualize if there is a problem, how do you break it down into different steps and building it out. I think that really was the first time that I felt like, oh, wow, this is a place for change and influence. And I think for me, leadership directly correlates to, are you a change maker? Are you an influencer? Or are you using your platform to do something for the social good and for everybody else?
Very interesting. So we are, of course, in the digital age. You're in the middle of it. You're in the thick of it as a software engineer working at a very large startup. That's been quite controversial in some quarters. What do you think is different about being a leader in this digital age? And how do you think that compares to the experiences you heard from Dorothy or Victoria earlier in the dialogue, who grew up in the pre-internet era, and who were young women in that pre-digital era as well?
While you think about that response, I just wanted to take a second to thank Dorothy Marsick for being with us. She has another commitment and needs to leave. So thank you so much, Dorothy.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Hope to see you again. Thank you.
Yeah, I think now that we are in thick of internet and we have platforms like TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, social media at our dispense to basically amplify whatever work we are doing and reach thousands, millions of audience, at the sake of you can shoot a small TikTok and you can have an impact of reaching millions of users. Or, you can basically go on your social media platforms and you become those micro influencers, nano influencers, or even a huge influencer, and you have all these people constantly looking up to you for advice and for your leadership. I think it has changed a lot in the fact that, now you're much more connected in terms of the world and in terms of giving your voice out. And I think that there are pros and cons. Pros being that you have this amount of impact when you're leading something, or you have, when a certain number of people are following you, a lot of brands also, feel more comfortable working with you, because, you have so many followers and you are that change maker or the leader in that particular space, and you can kind of influence a lot of decisions, be it making reviews, be it talking about the issues that are happening in the world, or be it just building out different things. And like, for example, today, if a leader like Melinda Gates or Sheryl Sandberg like stands up for something, she already has a lot of influence, like on the platform. So a lot of people look up to them. So they already have established themselves as authorized source, or like, somebody that, you can trust and believe. So it makes it much more easier to establish that authority even when you are on a social media upfront. However, downsides being is, like these same influencers, like who are constantly in the media spotlight, there's a lot of, there's first of all cancel culture, where, if you do anything wrong, that people would be like, okay, this person is cancelled. And so there's a lot of pressure in general for leaders and for influencers to, either constantly push out content to stay relevant in today's world, and then be that source of truth. Or in general, like they have to scrutinize each and every move on social media, and you also have to deal with thousands. Like you can have multiple positive reviews, but you can also get thousands of negative reviews, which can impact you as a leader, in your mental space. So I think there are a lot of pros and cons of being a digital leader currently.
Fascinating. I looked at your organization's website. So it is called returnships.org. Before we talk about it, and before we turn to the key contributors, so they can to hear their reflections on your journey and their questions and comments for you. Tell us about returnships.org. You explained where the idea came from. That's fascinating for a very successful young woman who has, at this stage of your life, I imagine, is not dealing with this issue. This is this is the issue that others around you or others in the world are dealing with. What led you to create this, and what is motivating and driving you to do so?
Absolutely. So growing up, like my closest family member, basically she had to leave the workforce, and throughout the time that like I spend my time with her, I would often see her, like feel like, oh my God, I had this amazing career, but I had to kind of give it up. And like being in India, not having as many opportunities where you have that amount of support from your family members, or in general from your in-laws and other people. Oftentimes, like, this is a big problem, and, constantly experiencing her experience, I felt like even though I'm not in that age, I experience the same, the agony, the feelings of, of leaving the workforce. Like, we talk about how women needs to be educated, but to be honest, that's not the problem. The problem is the support that they are missing right now. And then these women who are educated, after they get married, after they have children, oftentimes they have to take a back seat. They leave the workforce, and that's where a lot of women, their career ends there. It's because this support there is missing from the organizations, and also from their family members and from their community to even pursue these careers. And I think that's where I felt like, so I was like, okay, I'm in tech, so I can quickly Google and see maybe there is something there, basically, which kind of acknowledges this issue. And what I saw is like my family member who had this career gap of like 10, 20 years, like she had certain skills that was very relevant at that time. But now that you mentioned that we're in digital age, there are so many different tools, resources, and things that you need to know to even be relevant. Like, for example, you need to know how to use Zoom. You need to know how to send an email. That was not really important back in the day, 10, 20 years ago. Or you need to know how to operate a computer. That was not really necessarily relevant. So there's a huge missing gap between all these caregivers and, moms or anybody who has taken that gap and trying to even get these opportunities. Like a lot of people don't even know how to Google or how to find these opportunities, or even these opportunities that does exist. Like, for example, the returnship programs that does exist. They require people who kind of have this domain knowledge or have certain number of level to even sit and interview at the interview table. So there's this huge gap nobody was addressing at that time. where, one-stop shop of all these resources you would possibly need to return to the workforce. And that's where I was like, you know what, since I'm already helping my family member and I had this plan for her, I was like, why not have this plan for many people? Maybe maybe two people might be interested, and let's just build it and see what happens. So I built this course basically where it starts with first identifying yourself after having that huge break on, who you are outside of your relationships, outside of your marriage, outside of your children. What are your passions? What are your things? There's a module to identify yourself. Then there's a module to feel inspired that, okay, I'm hearing all these amazing people who have made the transition. So it's a possible journey. So through our podcast, we basically bring in people to talk about returning to the workforce. And then after that, after they're in that mind space, then kind of giving them all these trainings they can take. And, from basics like learning English, computer science, all the way to what kind of career paths they can choose, what is most relevant right now, what skills they should learn, how to be relevant with Gen Z culture and acronyms and random stuff like that. And then after you're trained, then basically how do you build an online presence? Like how do you build a resume? How do you build a portfolio site? Things like that. And after that, if you still feel stuck, basically connecting you to career coaches, mentors, therapists. And I think after that stage is somebody where somebody is actually ready to return to the workforce.
Fascinating. All right. Karen shared with me, I don't think she meant it to be a private comment, but she loved the title you selected. She says, Returnships is so creative. And actually, so you and I, Nabanita, met while we were both networking at TechCrunch Disrupt this week. And it's funny because I wasn't expecting to run into another nonprofit, which is a very broad category. And at first I thought, okay, this is a young person who's done something around internships to help other young people like herself find good internships. And then I looked at the website, and the more I read, the more I said, okay, there's a lot more there than something that is in response to your own needs. Caroline says, great work, Nabanita, and actually adds applause. And we can actually do that in the dialogue. So let's do that before we go to our contributors. Just to be a bit facetious, I imagine that perhaps when you hear followers, you think about, your generation thinks about social media followers, but yes, I don't want to be facetious. I want to go to our esteemed and distinguished key contributors, several of them have dedicated really their life's work, literally decades, to study of leadership and learning. We haven't even talked about the fact that you chose a course, a learning initiative, as one of the activities, one of the actions that you take. So let's go to Victoria Marsick. Would love to hear, Victoria, having also heard a little bit about your own perspective and your own journey. What did you hear as you listened to Nabanita's story? How does it connect to the other narratives we've heard tonight? What would you like to share back?
Oh, I heard so many things, and thank you very much, Nabanita. I've been waiting to hear your story. I really love the energy that you bring and the good that you're doing in the world. And, I think I've heard that technology is empowering to many people to reach out into the world. And I love the idea that you said, have your voice be out there, that your voice and your expression of yourself can be out there, and that it can be, the question that arose, I think, around Nancy, in some ways you brought it up around, is being a leader just to be out there to be visible, but you're talking about really that leadership to really fill gaps, to meet needs, to really contribute, to society in different ways. And I just am very inspired by that and very excited about it. It also makes me think that there may be different purposes for leadership. And that maybe we need to think about what kinds of leadership are needed in different situations, So it seems like we are in an era, again, I think historically there were eras like this that were really like the Renaissance, that were full of innovation. And and particularly with your point, your story, Nabanita, I think it shows how much innovation there is that has been untapped, because people didn't have a way of getting it out there. And I think it's just great that happens. And so I think, there are different kinds of leadership. So if you're the leadership of a startup, there's one kind of leadership. And if you're the leader of someone who's trying to get the voice out in the world, there's one kind of leadership. And then you have people who are I don't know, let's say government workers, because government workers tend to have long careers, over time, and their leadership role has to be a little different because they're not expected or rewarded to get their voice out in the world, in quite that way. And so it just calls for a different kind of leadership. Or was it Joyce, who talked about the leadership in an organization where you have a set of followers and you need to figure out how are we going to work together. I love her ability to listen for the followers or the people she's working with, to give voice, to hear their voices, So it just makes me think about the different kinds of leadership we need, and that, our vocabulary isn't very sophisticated because we talk about it as if it's one thing. In reality, there's different kinds of leadership in lots of different situations, and that we have to stop and ask, so what is leadership? What should leadership be doing here, and now, right? I mean, it seems like there's also the question of, Karen and I have been sort of delving into the complexity realm over the last year, and that it's one thing to have leadership if you have people really clearly aligned around a goal, and you have people who are, who are also looking to get the same thing done, et cetera, and where we know some things, or we've decided on certain paths to go through. And then when you find yourself in completely ambiguous circumstances, I heard that your approach is to just go do something and try it, right? I mean, why not, right? So this idea of trial and trial, is out there. So I think we're just needing to think about leadership somewhat differently depending on, what the situation is calling for, and then what the system allows to easily step up and do. So will the system allow somebody who's not traditionally invited to that play in that water, to do that? And technology, and also you're not tied in the past. Nabanita, I love that you're not tied to something from the past. You're able to move from a new framework, a new way of thinking about things. And some people walk around with a kind of like a heavy ball of what the past was like, that they can't break off so that they can see things in new ways. So lots of food for thought, and thank you very much for that.
Thank you. I wanted to share that. So Facebook's, one of the Facebook's principle is, fail fast. So it's basically, try a bunch of different things and see what fails and what doesn't. And, sometimes something can succeed. So that's something we should do. And another thing that you mentioned is not being tied to the past. I personally think that if there is a problem, and if you are, if you feel that there is a problem that you are facing on a day-to-day basis, you can either complain about it for a day, or you can solve it. And if you solve it, you're actually solving millions of lives problem. So every small thing you face every day can change millions of lives. So there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that score.
Wonderful. Nancy Dixon, would love to hear from you.
Well, I think what I would like is to try to live my life in a way that both heals and improves the world, and in that to think about how to relate to others in a way that helps them improve and heal in the world. And I have the feeling that that's not that's not about having a lot of followers or being successful or all of that. And that those are the words that I've heard a lot today, getting ahead, being successful, and so forth. But I don't know that that's the most important thing that we can be doing in the world. It is so. I kind of wish that this wasn't about learning and leadership, but that it was about, learning and growing, or learning and helping, or learning and improving the world. Because there's something about that word leadership that's very tied to hierarchy, to I have more followers than you. I'm thinking even Nabanita when people talk about, they often say, I have 1,000 followers. I have, this kind of thing. It's a more is better. So I worry about the term leadership, and I worry about a culture in which we're told we should strive to that. So maybe that's enough to say about that.
I love that, Nancy. That may we all be in this world to improve the lot of others and to heal. I think that's pretty neat. Reda, I was struck listening to Nabanita and some of the pieces of your journey that connect so well to hers, and I'm kind of anxious to have you do some sort of final reflections as we get near the end of this segment.
Just two very modest thoughts. One is about like the nature of leadership in the digital age. When I think about like what it means to use, the capabilities, the routines that confer decision options that enable you to do more than what you're supposed to do, more than what is expected of you. Maybe we need to define, and probably certainly in the academic realm, someone must have done it already, describe the characteristics of leadership in the digital age. And the second thing is about transmission between generations. I mean, there's, so we talk about, youth leadership, which I mean, given that everyone ultimately outgrows youth, that concept has never made sense to me. But maybe more in a more generalizable way, transmission between generations, and actually between generations, but also across geographies. We've brought together people. In this case, we've heard mostly, but not only, people based in the United States. There are many other kinds of things that divide us. And that yearning for more than, to be or to become more than what we are, and to help others do the same in the crazy world that we live in. Maybe that, again, that the digital age enables and supports ways to do that previously were not available to us. And it's a question of like, how long does it take for us to recognize and make sense of that and bring that into our conceptual frameworks for leadership or for coaching or for learning and teaching? Those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about. And then, I made some decisions as a 20-something year old to really work completely outside the system without any kind of safety net, and did that for about 20 years, working as a community organizer side by side with families facing, keep the story short, racism, disease, and poverty. And we discovered that we could do things in the early digital age, sort of the starting in the mid-90s, that simply wouldn't have been possible in the same way before. So I think there's a lot there. Those are just a few very modest thoughts and contribution.
Thank you, Reda. I saw in the chat, Wendy Rona commented that she loves this idea of a next level contribution. I'd love to have you say something about that, Wendy.
Hi, all. I'm Wendy Rona from the University of Georgia. Thank you for all your wonderful inputs. I've been having some technical challenges, so I hope I'm connected. I've just really been struck by the sort of my doodles here on my page. I've been thinking about this nexus of adult development, learning, and that collective impact that Nancy just went right to the heart of. For me, humanist learning, right? It's learning to be our best selves, our most whole, our best selves. And I think we do that through challenges. And certainly the adult development literature tells us, that we learn through challenges. And as we grow out of that youth that we were just talking about, it's necessarily interpersonal or intergroup or into the collective, right? We have to grow beyond ourselves. And I think that those challenges, that especially in the group context, those become the context for not only our next level learning, but our next level leadership. And I think in that sense, it's very temporal, it's not positional. And it really is about that next thing, whether it's doing the right thing or taking a group to that next space that they need to. And we're doing that all the time from, I have teenagers, and so I get to watch this daily, how they show up in that moment, right? It's about showing up in that moment and going, wow, what do I have to do there? And then turning that mirror on you so that you can show up in that space, in that collective space, to do something different that needs to happen. So thank you. That was very helpful.
Thank you, Wendy. I love that very much. That showing up in the moment and being there and doing the right thing. As we come to a close, and I think about all that we've heard. There's so many things that go around in my mind. I loved Dorothy's notion of the role of the arts in helping us get to the heart and soul of it. And it is interesting to me that we're ending on the heart and soul of it in both Nancy's comment and Wendy's. And I must say that Anu's story went to my heart. I really appreciated her, the role her mother had, the role that she had, and also the pressure to leave a job when it becomes too much, and how that connects us all to the issues around gender and voice. Victoria and I are part of a project that are doing interviews with MDs that we're talking to them about critical incidents of facing uncertainty in the pandemic, in the early days of the pandemic. And a theme that we hear again and again is the challenge and the pressure of feeling responsible to make a decision when you and nobody else has a clue what to do next. And so that the power of pressure but also the power of the support of other people, which I've heard Victoria talked about collaboration, others, Bill, I think, really spoke to that as well. And Nancy's notions of community really remind us that we're not in this alone, and that we do best when we do it together. I've been privileged to work together with Victoria Marsick for a very long time, and I'll assure you that it really does work better when you do it together. Victoria, I'd love to hear your sort of final reflections.
Well, that's always a good place to have final reflections is working together, right? I do think so. I mean, I do understand the pressures if you're in an organizational environment or you're in a situation where there's agreements, you have to get certain places and there's certain performance expectations right around them, that there is a limit to some of the collaboration you can do in the process. And I can drive people crazy with my, going back and forth about, well, what if we think about it this way? And what if we think about it that way? So, sometimes you just have to make a decision and go for it. But I think that every time Karen and I have spent the time taking more time to think things through and to kind of pose it from different perspectives, we've come up with better solutions. And so I think if you have the luxury of time, and if there are some options, I think Nabanita, you're right, that trial and trial, sometimes there's so many things you can do rather than just, freezing there. You should just try some of them and see what happens as a result. But you also have to be in a place that allows for that. We still, I don't think, allow people to make mistakes, meaning, Chris Hardress always said a mistake was simply an error. You set out to do one thing and you got something else. But mistakes in our society are shrouded with blaming, finger pointing, loss of prestige, loss of status. And so it's sometimes hard for people to kind of go that route. But anyway, those are some meanderings. I really enjoyed hearing from everybody. And Nabanita, I love your energy and, flash into the future about some of the great things that are out there that we can take advantage of getting to know better.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's see if we can make some real noise as opposed to simulated one. Let me just see if I can ask everyone to unmute. And if you're still here, still with us, let's feel free to do what humans usually do in this kind of situation, which is greet each other and say goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you all for being with us. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Lovely to see you all.
Bye.